October 12, 1923. Ashwood Manor, Tennessee. Tabitha. The walls remember things that people wish to forget. Creaking boards, hollow spaces, and plaster sealed long ago can whisper secrets if you're quiet enough. In one Tennessee manor, the truth didn't whisper. It screamed. Because when the house was finally gutted, bones spilled from behind its walls, as though the structure itself had been swallowing people whole. Now you have to understand, these weren't just any bones. They weren't the relics of some forgotten animal, nor the casual disposal of livestock. No, these were human remains, jawbones with teeth still intact, delicate finger bones pressed together like prayers, and ribs stacked like brittle firewood. The discovery was enough to rattle even the most hardened construction crew. But what chilled investigators most wasn't merely what was found. It was who the whispers said had placed them there. Her name was Tabitha, an enslaved housemaid whose very existence was nearly erased from history. For generations, she was spoken of only in hushed tones, as though summoning her memory carried danger. But the story lingers, because Tabitha was not just a victim of the world she was born into. According to local legend, she was also its avenger. Welcome, mystery seekers, to Echoes of Truth. This isn't a place for faint hearts or casual curiosity. This is where we peel back the plaster of history and expose the bones, literally, of what has been hidden. Tonight, I want you to picture yourself standing in that Tennessee manor, staring at the hollow cavity of a wall that has just spilled its secrets at your feet. Do you have the courage to keep looking deeper, to hear the story that was never meant to be told? Because what we're about to uncover isn't written in textbooks. It exists in shadows, in whispers, and in the hollow spaces of memory. If you're brave enough, subscribe now, leave a comment with your location, and join this investigation. After all, who knows what the walls of your own town might be hiding? I want you to picture this. Tennessee in the mid-1800s, a land heavy with summer heat and the low hum of cicadas that seemed endless. Plantations spread across rolling hills like kingdoms carved out of stolen soil, each grand house standing proud while the fields told another story entirely. Cotton and tobacco drove fortunes here, fortunes that dripped with sweat and blood. The air smelled of smoke from hearth fires, manure from stables, and sometimes, though no one said it aloud, the metallic tang of punishment. This was an age where the wealthy dined by candlelight in parlors with imported wallpaper, while outside, men, women, and children labored until their bodies gave out. Tennessee, like much of the South, held itself as genteel on the surface, but just beneath that thin veneer was terror. And in one particular household, the contradictions of that world coiled tightly together: refinement and brutality, silence and screams, life and death bound inside the same walls. It was here that Tabitha lived, not as a free woman, not as a guest, but as property. Her life measured not by dreams, but by utility, and yet she would become the house's most enduring shadow. Now you have to understand, the master of this manor wasn't just some cruel caricature out of folklore. No, he was respectable, even admired. His name, lost to most records, surfaces only in fragments. A man of European descent, tall, with a reputation for fairness among his peers. Neighbors would tip their hats when he rode into town. Merchants extended credit. Church leaders welcomed him into the front pew. To the outside world, he was the model of a successful Southern gentleman. But beneath that reputation lurked the true measure of him. Former accounts, whispers passed down through generations, describe him as meticulous, not merely in business, but in cruelty. Punishments were not random bursts of rage, but calculated lessons. And perhaps most unsettling, he carried himself with the air of a man who believed his cruelty was righteous. He was not a monster who thought himself evil. He was a man who thought himself right. And that makes him far more dangerous. To keep suspicion low, the family maintained what you might call a cover story, though at the time it was simply the public mask of Southern life. The house was presented as orderly, godly, and prosperous. Visitors recalled suppers filled with laughter, Bible readings after meals, and children playing on polished wooden floors. If there were screams carried through the night air, they were dismissed as the rowdy calls of field hands or the natural noises of the wilderness. The plantation ledger books showed columns of numbers, cotton yields, tobacco harvests, debts paid and owed. Nothing about those neat figures hinted at the truth, and even when certain enslaved individuals went missing, their absence was explained away as runaways. They fled north, the master would sigh, shaking his head at supper, pretending grief at their betrayal. The lie was convincing enough because it was the kind of lie everyone wanted to believe. After all, acknowledging what truly happened would require facing a darkness most were unwilling to name. Let's be real. The house itself was designed to conceal as much as it revealed. Brick walls thick enough to muffle screams, crawl spaces that doubled as storage, cellars where damp air mixed with mildew. But the most unsettling feature wasn't architectural grandeur. It was the hidden voids. During renovations long after the war, workers discovered walls with uneven depths, cavities that didn't line up with the blueprints, panels nailed in ways that made no sense. These weren't mistakes. They were intentional, crafted spaces, hiding places, prisons, or, as history would one day show, tombs. The infrastructure of cruelty is rarely just whips and chains. It's the building itself, designed and reinforced to maintain silence. And if walls could talk, these would have screamed decades earlier. But when neighbors noticed odd things, like a servant who was there one week and gone the next, or the way strange odors sometimes drifted from the house, the family had explanations ready. A missing maid? She ran off. A smell. Spoiled food left too long in the larder. Blood on the floorboards. A hunting accident, nothing more. These explanations were plausible enough, at least to those who didn't want to see the truth. And remember, this was a time when the word of a wealthy white family outweighed any possible protest from the enslaved. To question their explanations would not only cast suspicion, but also invite social ostracism. So the neighbors, the merchants, even the pastors, they all accepted the convenient lies. Silence became the accomplice. Every story like this has an insider, someone who knew more than they admitted, someone who played a part. In this household, it was the overseer, a man tasked with keeping order among the enslaved. He was a bridge between the master's command and the enslaved people's suffering. He wasn't family, but he was treated as such, invited to meals, given his own quarters, respected for his management. And it was he who ensured that the cover stories held. If someone asked too many questions, he was the one to laugh it off, to distract, to shift suspicion. Some say he even helped seal the walls himself, hammering nails into wood, ensuring that what went inside never came out again. Was he a coward trying to keep his position, or was he a sadist enjoying the silence he maintained? That question lingers, unanswered, like a shadow on the page. And then, the victims. This is where the story gets truly chilling. These were not nameless, faceless people. They were daughters, sons, mothers, fathers. Enslaved souls whose humanity was stripped from them in public, but who still lived entire worlds in private. They sang songs at dusk. They whispered prayers under their breath. They told each other stories to keep hope alive. Many were young women assigned to housework, women like Tabitha herself. Their labor was invisible, but essential, keeping the household running like clockwork. And yet, those same women were the most vulnerable, isolated from the fields, trapped under constant watch, at the mercy of the master's whims. They were easy to disappear, easy to erase, until Tabitha, in her quiet defiance, ensured that their erasure would not be complete. Of course, secrets like these rarely stay hidden forever. And in this case, an accidental witness changed everything. Accounts vary, but the story often tells of a child, one of the master's own, stumbling into a half-finished space, a wall where plaster had yet to be smoothed. What the child saw is debated. Some say it was a skull, others claim it was just a pile of bones half covered in cloth. But whatever it was, the child screamed, and that scream, echoing down the halls, drew attention the family could not entirely suppress. The witness was hushed, their testimony smothered beneath threats or bribes, but whispers spread, as whispers always do. And Tabitha's name began to surface, her shadow weaving into rumor, the enslaved housemaid who knew the walls better than anyone. Now you have to understand, the child who stumbled upon those bones never forgot. Imagine it, soft candlelight flickering across plaster dust, the smell of damp wood, and then a face staring back at you from the wall, teeth still set in a grin, no longer human. The child screamed, but adults dismissed it. Imagination, they said. Children see monsters everywhere. And yet the child's behavior changed. Nights were filled with terrors, screams that rattled through the manor. Servants whispered of a curse, while the family doubled down on denial. To admit what was seen meant admitting to something unspeakable, something that would shatter their reputation forever. The child grew pale, nervous, quick to silence, and eventually silent altogether. The trauma was buried, much like the bones themselves, but it left a scar. You see, denial is its own kind of violence. It twists memory, erodes sanity, and leaves the witness carrying a burden they were never meant to bear. Of course, whispers spread beyond the household, and eventually questions were asked. A local sheriff rode out, more to appease rumor than to investigate. He looked at the walls, at the construction tools lying around, at the piles of plaster dust, and declared it a misunderstanding. No bones here, only scraps from hogs or deer, he assured those who dared inquire. The family stood beside him, nodding solemnly, their reputations intact. And just like that, the inquiry was over before it began. This is where the story gets truly chilling. The system wasn't designed to find the truth. It was designed to erase it. Officials, neighbors, even the church, they had no desire to see horror in their midst. So, the truth was labeled imagination, and the matter quietly dismissed. The walls stayed closed, the family's mask stayed polished, and Tabitha, still unseen, remained in the shadows, watching, waiting. Yet some evidence could not be plastered over. Survivors of the household carried marks that couldn't be hidden. Women returned from punishments with burns on their hands. Men walked with limps that never healed. There were whispers of one maid who stopped speaking altogether, her eyes vacant, as if she had glimpsed something so terrible that language itself abandoned her. Others bore scars in places they kept covered, scars that spoke of cruelties no polite company would dare name. These altered bodies became silent testaments, living evidence of crimes denied. But who would listen? Who would believe them? In a society where enslaved voices carried no weight, their scars were treated as invisible. Invisible, that is, to everyone except Tabitha, who catalogued those injuries in memory like one might collect evidence for a trial the world refused to hold. Let's be real. Cruelty in that household was not random. It was calculated, almost experimental. Tabitha saw it firsthand. Punishments weren't just meant to discipline. They were meant to test thresholds, to see how much pain a body could endure before it broke. The overseer kept notes, thin scraps of parchment marked with chilling detail. Days survived without water, hours spent in confinement, responses to different methods of restraint. This was more than sadism. It was methodology, dressed in the language of order, carried out beneath the guise of necessity. The house was not merely a place of residence. It was a laboratory of suffering. And within those walls, Tabitha began to understand something that terrified her even more. These men believed their cruelty was progress, and if progress was built on bones, then bones were what they intended to keep. This is where the story turns. In every tale of darkness, there's one figure who refuses to disappear, who refuses to let silence become the only memory. For this story, that figure is Tabitha. Now you have to understand, Tabitha wasn't born into resistance. She was born into chains, her identity shaped by the cruel mathematics of ownership. Descriptions of her survive in fragments. A woman in her early 20s, small-framed, her hands calloused from endless scrubbing, her eyes sharp enough to see more than she ever dared to say. She was known as obedient, quiet, almost invisible in her servitude, but that invisibility became her shield. She listened when others weren't listening. She saw the overseer's notes, the master's routines, the hollow places of the house, and she carried her own grief. Whispers suggest that among the bones sealed in the walls may have been someone she loved, a sister perhaps, or a child lost too soon. That grief festered, hardened into something colder. Tabitha may not have been free in body, but she began to wage war in silence. I want you to picture this. Late at night, the manor heavy with the sounds of sleep. The family slumbers upstairs, the overseer snores in his quarters, and only the wind stirs the shutters. In those hours, Tabitha moved like a shadow, candle stub in hand, tracing the edges of the walls, slipping into crawl spaces she alone knew how to reach. She learned where the hidden cavities lay, where boards pulled loose with just enough leverage, where bricks were unevenly set. What she found inside chilled her, but she did not turn away. Skulls with hair still clinging, scraps of cloth stiff with old blood, bones stacked deliberately, not carelessly. She cataloged them in memory, like a secret map etched into her mind. Her investigation was not just curiosity. It was survival, and it was preparation. The house thought it had consumed its victims, but Tabitha was making sure their stories could not be digested so easily. Can you handle what comes next? Because this is where the story gets truly chilling. You've followed me into the parlor. You've stood with me at the child's scream. You've looked at the scars survivors carried. But now we walk with Tabitha herself as she peers into the belly of the beast. And once you see what she saw, you can't unsee it. This is the moment where history stops being dusty records and becomes flesh, bone, and blood again. If you're still with me, if your pulse hasn't driven you away yet, subscribe to Echoes of Truth. Comment below that you're ready to keep digging, because what Tabitha uncovers will not only test her courage, it will test yours too. One night, tucked into the narrow, suffocating crawlspace of a wall near the kitchen hearth, Tabitha stumbled upon a secret so grotesque it seemed almost impossible to comprehend. She had been creeping through the shadows, her hands brushing against the warped timbers, the smell of smoke and old wood thick in the air, when her fingers met something unusual, something wrapped in the tattered remnants of what might once have been a piece of cloth. As she carefully unwound the brittle fabric, her breath caught, and her stomach twisted into knots. There, pressed into the darkness like a relic of some unspeakable ritual, lay the skeleton of a child. Small, delicate, painfully human, the bones were fragile yet complete, the tiny skull still bearing the faint, ghostly impressions of baby teeth. The contrast of extremes, the heat from the hearth on one side, pressing against her skin, and the icy chill of death emanating from the hollow wall, made her shiver uncontrollably. Every instinct in her body screamed to flee, yet she could not tear her eyes away. This was no ordinary discovery. This was a burial stripped of all dignity, hidden as if someone had been desperate to erase not just a life, but the very memory of that life itself. Tabitha's mind raced, trying to imagine who this child might have been. Could this fragile soul have been born into bondage, never given the chance to play, to laugh, to simply exist? Or perhaps the child was the offspring of unspeakable acts, a life extinguished to prevent scandal, snuffed out before anyone could speak or even remember. The weight of the knowledge pressed down on her, heavier than the timbers above, heavier than the night itself. Her heart pounded as she realized the horrifying truth. This house was not merely a place of labor or domestic servitude. It was a carefully constructed graveyard, a repository for lives deemed inconvenient, invisible, or threatening. And within that knowledge lay a burden unlike any she had carried before. For in this moment she understood that she was alone. She was the sole living witness, the only voice capable of acknowledging these lost, hidden lives. Her courage trembled alongside her body as she pressed closer, almost instinctively whispering promises of remembrance to the child who could not respond. She knew that whatever horrors had taken place here could not stay buried forever. And yet, fear gnawed at her. Fear not only of the household and its ruthless authority, but of the terrifying responsibility that now rested squarely on her shoulders, to bear witness for those who had no one else to speak for them. Her secret investigations, carried out in the quiet of night and the shadows of hidden crawl spaces, could not remain concealed forever. The walls, dark and silent witnesses to decades of horrors, seemed to murmur warnings she could barely hear over the racing of her own heart. One night, as she carefully emerged from a narrow crawl space near the kitchen, The dim glow of a lantern suddenly caught her silhouette, casting her shadow long and trembling against the wooden panels. The overseer's voice, sharp and cold, sliced through the darkness like a whip. "What are you doing here?" The words hung in the air, deadly in their precision, and panic surged through her body in an electric jolt. There was no time to think, only to act. Without hesitation, Tabitha bolted, her bare feet slapping against the worn floorboards, sending up clouds of dust that caught the weak lantern light like tiny, frantic sparks. The sound of her heart hammering in her chest seemed to compete with the sudden stir of the master's hunting dogs, their low growls and barking joining the cacophony of her escape. Clutched tightly in her hands was the fragile scrap of cloth she had taken from the child's skeleton. The only tangible evidence she dared carry, the sole proof that could challenge decades of buried secrecy. The overseer's shouts grew louder, echoing off the walls of the hallways, following her down staircases and through corridors she had memorized as a child. Boots thundered in pursuit, each step a reminder that discovery could mean death. Tabitha's lungs burned as she hurtled through the darkened house, fear sharpening every sense. Finally, she burst through the heavy wooden door into the open night. Moonlight barely illuminated the sprawling fields beyond, turning each stalk of tobacco into looming skeletal sentinels brushing against her arms, cold and cruel. Shadows seemed to twist and do. Ants in her peripheral vision, every rustle of leaves and snapping twig amplifying the threat pursuing her. The chase had become something far greater than her nightly investigations. This was no longer merely about uncovering the unspeakable secrets hidden behind the manor's walls. It was about survival. Every beat of her heart, every frantic sprint across the uneven terrain, was a battle for her life and a testament to her courage. The darkness of the night, the oppressive weight of the overseer's fury, and the knowledge of what she carried combined into a maelstrom of terror and determination. Tabitha ran not just for herself, but for the silent, unseen victims whose remains she had discovered, carrying with her the undeniable truth that someone, finally, would remember them. By the pale light of dawn, Tabitha stumbled into the outskirts of a nearby town, every step a testament to the terror and exertion of the night behind her. Her body ached, muscles torn from the sprint, skin scraped raw against unforgiving timber and brambles, hands still clutching the fragile scrap of cloth that held the silent, grim proof of what she had discovered. She was trembling, not just from exhaustion, but from the adrenaline that had yet to subside, from the knowledge that she now carried a truth so dangerous it could unmake the lives of those who had thought themselves untouchable. She had evidence, she had undeniable proof, yet the bitter, cruel reality pressed down on her. Truth alone held no power in the hands of an enslaved woman. Her voice, raw and urgent, could barely compete with the weight of centuries of entrenched authority, the unshakable belief in the invulnerability of the manor and its owners. And yet, she could not remain silent. Every syllable she spoke, every desperate plea, was an attempt to breathe life into the memory of the child hidden behind those walls. She sought out a preacher first, his robe swishing softly against the dirt path as he listened, polite but skeptical. She spoke of bones tucked into walls, of lives erased and secrets buried, her words tumbling out in a rush, her breath ragged, her hands shaking with the need to be heard. Then she approached townsfolk, faces lined with curiosity and suspicion, hoping for a spark of recognition, a glimmer of compassion. Some averted their eyes, discomfort warring with civility. Others leaned closer, only to dismiss her claims with a polite laugh or a shake of the head. The scrap of cloth she carried, dampened by sweat, flecked with dirt, a silent testament to a child's stolen life, was mocked as rags, meaningless remnants. The delicate bones she could describe in detail were shrugged it off as animal remains, the whisper of humanity in them erased by disbelief and convenience. The reversal was swift and merciless. Tabitha, who had risked everything, freedom, life, even her very sanity, found herself branded a liar, a mad woman unworthy of trust. The family she sought to expose remained untarnished, their public facade flawless, their authority intact. Meanwhile, her own safety teetered on a knife's edge. Each step she took a gamble with those who might wish to silence her permanently. Yet beneath the fear, a stubborn, burning defiance flared. The fire within her would not be extinguished. If no one believed her, she would carry the truth herself. She would remember for the forgotten child, speak for the voiceless, and ensure that one day, whether through memory, confession, or the whispering walls themselves, the truth would emerge, undeniable and unyielding. Weeks later, the authorities finally arrived at the Tennessee Manor, summoned not by the undeniable truth Tabitha carried, but by the insistent rumor, the mounting whispers of townsfolk, and the gnawing unease that had begun to ripple through the region. The grandiose estate, with its imposing columns and weathered brickwork, seemed untouched by time, but within its walls, darkness festered in ways the outside world could never imagine. Imagine the scene as the officers approached. The massive front doors swung open with a groan of reluctant wood, revealing a house still steeped in the lingering scent of old smoke and soot, the kind that clung to centuries of labor and human sweat. Sunlight poured through tall, grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that floated like spectral dancers, turning the quiet air into a stage for a tragedy unseen. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards beneath their boots, an eerie accompaniment to the anticipation, the dread settling like a weight on everyone present. Tabitha, fragile yet resolute, guided them through the hidden passages she alone knew, her knowledge carved from years of servitude and careful observation. Each turn revealed more of the manor's sinister secrets, walls that seemed solid, yet concealed the unspeakable, the grotesque accumulation of lives erased in secrecy. When officers finally breached the concealed chambers, what they saw was a nightmare made tangible. Shelves upon shelves of bones, meticulously organized yet horrifying in their implication, were interspersed with fragments of children's toys. A broken doll here, a tiny wooden horse there, each piece a cruel echo of stolen childhood. Strands of hair, fabrics matted with decay, and scraps of clothing woven together in macabre patterns lined the walls, transforming the hidden spaces into a grotesque tapestry of forgotten suffering. The air was dense, suffocating, heavy with the pungent metallic tang of long-hidden decay. Some officers turned away, gagging. Others muttered curses, their professional composure unraveling under the assault of such raw, unmediated horror. Cameras clicked and pens scratched, dutifully recording what they could. Yet no lens or notebook could fully capture the oppressive, almost sentient weight of the chamber. The walls themselves seemed to speak, whispering secrets in the hush of dust and shadow, telling tales of brutality and silence that had endured for decades. The enormity of what had been hidden, the scale of the horror that Tabitha had carried alone, pressed down on everyone present, leaving a tangible ache in the chest and a hollowness in the stomach. For once, disbelief had no place. The truth was impossible to deny, and yet its magnitude left every witness shaken to the core, questioning how such evil could remain unnoticed for so long, concealed behind layers of normalcy, propriety, and the convenient blindness of the world outside. And then came the faces behind the horror, faces that had for so long hidden in plain sight, worn like masks of civility over the abyss of their cruelty. The master of the house, a man whose public persona had been carefully cultivated, civic leader, respected landowner, the kind of figure whose name was spoken with admiration at church gatherings and social events, was revealed in the harsh glare of the investigation to be far more sinister than anyone could have imagined. Methodical, meticulous, utterly devoid of empathy, he had orchestrated decades of suffering with the calm precision of a surgeon, yet without the slightest trace of conscience. It was as if the lives of those he enslaved were no more than chess pieces, each moved, hidden, or discarded at his whim. Beside him stood the overseer, long considered simply harsh and demanding, whose iron discipline had been rationalized by society as necessary to maintain order. But the truth was far darker. He was the architect of countless hidden cruelties, the one who ensured that the house's grotesque secrets remained buried, the enforcer who converted fear into compliance with chilling efficiency. Together, they had cultivated a public image that was almost laughably respectable. Philanthropy, regular church attendance, polite conversation, smiles that could charm a visitor, all carefully arranged to mask a private world defined by terror, concealment, and exploitation. As the evidence was laid bare, shelves of bones, fragments of toys, scraps of hair, and fabric woven into grotesque patterns, the masks that had long shielded them from scrutiny fell away. One could see it in the smallest details, the micro-tremors in their hands, the subtle twitch of an eye, the fleeting glances cast at each other, desperate to calculate a way to escape or reinterpret the unfolding reality. Yet no calculation could counter the weight of incontrovertible proof. They were exposed, vulnerable, and stripped of the power that had long insulated them from accountability. And even in that downfall, there was a dark fascination, a reminder that evil is human and often frighteningly intelligent. They were calculating, clever, and keenly aware of the systems, social, legal, and cultural, that had long protected them. Their cunning had allowed horrors to persist in secret, but now, cornered by truth, they could no longer manipulate perception. The terror they had inflicted had finally turned inward, reflecting back upon themselves. For anyone observing, it was a terrifying lesson that the architects of horror often live quietly among us, masked in ordinary respectability, human yet monstrous, their awareness of their own impunity as chilling as their crimes. Now let's be real, this wasn't an isolated tragedy, and the deeper investigators dug, the more the threads of horror unraveled into something vast, almost incomprehensible. Tabitha's revelation had pierced the surface of one household secret, but the evidence quickly revealed that the Tennessee Manor was merely a single node in a sprawling lattice of complicity. Letters, meticulously folded and carefully hidden, trade records that cataloged transactions in goods and labor that should never have existed, and whispered correspondences passed from hand to hand, all pointed to a network of enablers far beyond the immediate property. Wealthy families, merchants, and distant officials were implicated. Some had turned blind eyes to the suffering under their noses, others had facilitated it outright, and still more had profited, knowingly or unknowingly, from the commodification of human life. What had seemed like a localized act of cruelty was, in truth, a symptom of a system engineered to exploit and dehumanize, a mechanism that allowed horror to flourish behind closed doors, while the public marveled at polite facades of civility and respectability. Bones hidden in walls were not merely evidence of one household's depravity. They were a stark, physical manifestation of a society willing to commodify life itself. Each fragment whispered of a world in which human dignity was negotiable, in which profit, reputation, and power outweighed compassion or morality. Tabitha's small act of defiance, born of instinct, courage, and grief, had peeled back the delicate veneer of civilization, exposing the raw latticework of corruption and cruelty that connected states, towns, and even oceans. Documents revealed connections between merchants who supplied tools and materials, officials who ignored complaints, and distant relatives who quietly transferred assets and continued to benefit from the labor and lives destroyed. The scope was dizzying. This was not just a moral failing of one household, one county, or even one state. It was a systemic, almost industrial-scale injustice. And with that realization came the haunting question that refused to leave anyone's mind. How many other homes, estates, or plantations held similar secrets behind their walls? How many other walls concealed the echoes of lives erased, the cries that had been silenced and buried alongside bones? Tabitha's courage had exposed a single truth, but the world seemed suddenly infinite in its moral darkness, as if every polished facade and respectable household might harbor its own hidden horrors. The investigators could follow the letters, the records, the leads, but they could not see every hidden room, every wall that held secrets. And that uncertainty, that gnawing doubt that more bones waited unseen, more atrocities remained unpunished, lingered long after the physical evidence had been catalogued, photographed, and filed. It was a stark reminder that evil, often spreads quietly, invisibly, and that one person's courage, however extraordinary, is often only the first glimmer of truth in a much larger, darker world. Even after the raid, a heavy, almost suffocating societal silence settled over the case, as if the world itself were taking a long, deliberate breath to avoid confronting the truth. Newspapers, those supposed chroniclers of public knowledge, offered only cursory mentions of the unfortunate discoveries within the Tennessee Manor, and even those were brief, buried between advertisements for tonics and local fairs. The gruesome reality of bones hidden in walls, the evidence of lives snuffed out in secrecy, was quickly buried beneath stories that were easier to digest, more convenient to discuss: weddings, harvests, and the latest political squabbles. Church leaders, pillars of moral authority, spoke of forgiveness, redemption, and divine will, urging their congregations to move forward rather than dwell on justice. Local politicians, keenly aware of the fragile image of order and civility their region depended upon, downplayed the horrors entirely, reassuring constituents and themselves that their communities remained safe, moral, and orderly. They leaned on decorum as a shield, presenting a polished facade to the world that masked the rot festering behind closed doors. And yet the bones themselves persisted, stubborn and mute witnesses that refused to be erased, a constant reminder that the truth could not be fully buried. Tabitha's role, her courage, her tireless insistence on revealing what others sought to hide, was acknowledged quietly, tucked away in private letters and whispered conversations among those who had seen the horrors firsthand. In public, however, her bravery was eclipsed by societal propriety, the unspoken rule that reputation outweighed reality, that appearances must be maintained even in the face of undeniable evidence. This conspiracy of silence was insidious precisely because it was not always deliberate, not always legal. It was cultural, almost instinctual, a collective shrug that allowed atrocities to vanish behind polite facades, that let complicity hide behind normalcy. The human mind, it seems, prefers to ignore what cannot be neatly categorized or reconciled with its comfortable worldview. This is where the crime extends far beyond those who physically committed it. The horror is amplified by the willingness of society to look away, to prioritize order over justice, propriety over morality. It lives not only in the bones within walls, but in the hushed conversations, the sideways glances, the moral compromises that allowed the truth to be muted. And it forces us to ask ourselves, uncomfortably, how many injustices continue, even today, because we choose silence? How often does civility become a veneer for cruelty? Tabitha's story, extraordinary though it was, remains as much a testament to human courage as it is a cautionary tale about the cost of collective indifference. In the stillness after the raid, the silence itself became an accomplice, echoing with questions that had no easy answers. The key players finally faced some measure of justice, though it was a justice that felt partial, incomplete, a hollow echo compared to the magnitude of their crimes. The master of the house, the outwardly respected patriarch whose public persona had inspired admiration, was tried and convicted, as was the overseer, the man whose iron hand had kept terror in motion behind closed doors. Yet, even as judges pronounced sentences and gavel strikes rang through the courtroom, the weight of what they had done, decades of cruelty, secret burials, the systematic dehumanization of countless lives, was scarcely matched by the punishments handed down. Prison walls could not erase the terror they had sown. Confinement could not undo the lives they had extinguished. Survivors, those who had endured the unimaginable, were finally freed from bondage, yet they carried with them scars that would never fully heal. Some bore the marks on their bodies, wounds inflicted by tools, chains, or brute hands. Others bore deeper, invisible scars, memories that visited in dreams, a constant echo of fear, sorrow, and betrayal, shadowing each step of their new, uncertain lives. And Tabitha? She remained the most enigmatic figure of all, a shadow slipping through history like smoke. After the trials, she vanished from the written record, leaving only whispers and speculation behind. Some accounts suggest she fled northward, perhaps finding refuge in communities where freedom was more than a distant hope. carving out a life far removed from the manners that had defined her torment and courage. Others claim she lingered in the shadows, invisible yet vigilant, quietly watching to ensure that the horrors she had unearthed could never return, guarding the bones and secrets in ways history could never document. The bitter paradox of her story is impossible to ignore. The hero, the one who had risked life and sanity to confront monstrous truths, survived, yet her reward was obscurity. The villains fell under the weight of law, yet their legacies persisted, not as headlines or monuments, but in whispers, in unmarked graves, in walls that might have hidden even more horrors still undiscovered. In reflecting on this, one is forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Justice, when measured by human courts, is often partial. Heroism may go unnoticed, and evil, even when punished, can echo through generations, leaving an indelible mark on the collective memory. Tabitha's courage remains a quiet testament to resistance in the face of overwhelming cruelty, a reminder that truth can be uncovered, even when the world initially refuses to see it. Her story is not neatly contained in history books. It lingers, like dust motes in a sunbeam, catching the light of remembrance, defying the shadows that sought to erase it. Tabitha of Tennessee leaves us with a lesson that lingers long after the walls of the manor have crumbled, long after the echoes of her footsteps have faded into history. Her courage, quiet yet unwavering, reminds us that heroism does not always arrive with fanfare or recognition. Resistance does not always roar. It can whisper, persist in the shadows, and act in ways that evade immediate notice. In the hidden corridors of that Tennessee house, Tabitha's defiance was invisible to the world, yet monumental in consequence. She confronted horrors that many would rather ignore, bore witness to truths that threatened the carefully constructed facades of respectability, and risked everything to ensure that the silent, forgotten dead might speak through her actions. And her story teaches us that truth, no matter how suppressed, has a way of clawing its way into light, even if it takes decades for justice, acknowledgement, or understanding to follow. Yet, the lesson carries a darker, equally inescapable weight. It is not enough for a single person to act with bravery if the society surrounding them turns a blind eye. Complacency, indifference, or cultural complicity allows monsters to thrive unchecked, and history is filled with quiet enablers, those who look away, who soften their gaze to preserve comfort or reputation. Tabitha's courage shines brightest against this backdrop of societal silence, highlighting the stark contrast between the resilience of the human spirit and the suffocating power of collective inaction. Her legacy is therefore dual. It is hope intertwined with horror, heroism coexisting with tragedy, a single flame flickering in a house built on darkness. Her story challenges us to ask uncomfortable questions. What walls around us today conceal truths we refuse to see? How often do we prioritize comfort over justice, silence over exposure, convenience over mortality? And it warns us that while one individual can disrupt secrecy, it is only through awareness, vigilance, and courage multiplied across communities that systems of oppression can be dismantled. Tabitha's life, obscured by time and shadow, calls us to look beyond appearances, to peer behind the walls of comfort and convention, to question what is presented as normal, and to seek what is hidden. In remembering her, we honor not just the horrors she uncovered, but the extraordinary resilience of a single human soul daring to challenge a world built to bury the truth. Could something like this happen today? Would we even recognize it if it did? That haunting question, whispered through the walls of a Tennessee manor centuries ago, still resonates, pressing against the edges of our consciousness. I want you to picture Tabitha, her courage, raw and uncompromising, shining in the dim shadows of hidden hallways, her risk, enormous yet embraced with a quiet determination, her vigilance, tireless and unrelenting, moving unseen among the powerful and the complacent. She reminds us that the line between safety and danger is fragile, and that one individual, armed with nothing but truth and conviction, can challenge horrors carefully concealed behind facades of normalcy. Now I want you to imagine holding a secret like hers, the weight of knowledge, the trembling responsibility of knowing that lives were taken and that the world around you might refuse to see or believe it. Where would you hide? How would you act? And more importantly, how far would you go to make certain that silence does not triumph over justice? These are not just rhetorical questions. They are invitations to examine your own courage, to measure the strength of your own conviction in the face of systemic concealment and societal indifference. Tabitha's story is a mirror, reflecting both the terrifying potential for cruelty in humanity and the equally terrifying potential for resistance that resides within the quietly brave. So I ask you to join us here at Echoes of Truth. Subscribe, share this story, and comment with your own answer to that chilling question. Where would you hide? What would you risk if faced with a secret the world was determined not to see? Your participation is more than engagement. It is a commitment to remember, to question, and to bear witness alongside us. And don't stray too far, because our journey is far from over. Our next story will carry us north to the icy streets of St. Petersburg, where a chilling mystery lies buried beneath layers of snow and silence, and where justice may prove as elusive and convoluted as the frozen alleyways themselves. Stay with us, because if history teaches us anything, it is that the shadows are never empty, and the truths hidden within them are waiting for those brave enough to find them.